What do you think is the key to achieving our goals, our success? Some people suggest things like hard work, focus, persistence. But research shows these are all byproducts of something else, something much more powerful that we can all develop. It is this very special something that really is critical to success, and is what I'm here to discuss with you today. Someone who has achieved great success is Josh Waitzkin, a chess international master and the subject of the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Nobody has won all the national chess championships that Josh has. But even more impressive, when he turned 21, he took on the challenge of mastering something completely new and very different from chess: martial arts. He realized that he had learned how to grow and succeed, and he could apply that understanding to other domains. And so, he devoted himself relentlessly to Tai Chi Chuan. And after lots of hard work, many failures, and some broken joints, he became a great martial artist, and he won 2 world championships. Now he's off to jiu-jitsu. So what does Josh say is the greatest thing that ever happened to him? Believe it or not, he says, losing my first national chess championship, because it helped me avoid many of the psychological traps. The key trap that Josh avoided was believing that he was special, that he was smarter than other people, and that he didn't have to work hard. He could have thought of himself as a prodigy, but he doesn't think that he has extraordinary intelligence. He says, the moment we believe that success is determined by an ingrained level of ability, we will be brittle in the face of adversity. Josh often quotes Stanford professor Carol Dweck, who discovered that some people see intelligence or abilities as fixed, what is called a fixed mindset, while other people see them, as Josh does, as qualities that can be developed, a growth mindset. More important, Dr. Dweck discovered that these 2 different mindsets lead to very different behaviors and results. In a study she did with Dr. Lisa Blackwell, several hundred 7th graders were surveyed to determine which mindset each student had, and then they were tracked for 2 years. Results showed that the students with a growth mindset, those who thought they could change their own intelligence, increased their grades over time, while those with a fixed mindset did not. You can see the trend. The gap in performance just widens and widens over time. The difference between these 2 groups? A different perspective on intelligence. Other studies have shown similar effects for our mindset about other abilities, like problem solving, playing sports, managing people, or anything else you'd like. Dancing la Macarena. The key to success is not simply effort or focus or resilience, but it is the growth mindset that creates them. The mindset itself is critical. Research shows that when we directly try to build grit or persistence, it is not nearly as effective as addressing the mindset that underlies them. How many of us think of ourselves as not math people, or creative, or sociable, or athletic, or conversely, that we're naturals? If we're to fulfill our potential, we have to start thinking differently. We have to realize that we're not chained to our current capabilities. Neuroscience shows that the brain is very malleable, and we can change our own ability to think and to perform. In fact, many of the most accomplished people of our era were thought of by experts to have no future. People like Charles Darwin, Lucille Ball, Marcel Proust, and many others. But they, along with all great achievers, from Mozart to Einstein, built their abilities. But the key insight that I would like you to walk away with today is that when we realize that we can change our own abilities, when we have a growth mindset, we bring our game to new levels. So how does a growth mindset do that? It turns out that there are physiological manifestations to mindset. Brain scans show that for people with a fixed mindset, the brain becomes most active when receiving information about how the person performed, such as a grade or a score. But for people with a growth mindset, the brain becomes most active when receiving information about what they could do better next time. In other words, people with a fixed mindset worry the most about how they're judged, while those with a growth mindset focus the most on learning. There are other consequences of mindset. People with a fixed mindset see effort as a bad thing, something that only people with low capabilities need, while those with a growth mindset see effort as what makes us smart, as the way to grow. And when they hit a setback or failure, people with a fixed mindset tend to conclude that they're incapable. So to protect their ego, they lose interest or withdraw. We observe that as lack of motivation, but behind it is a fixed mindset. Whereas people with a growth mindset understand that setbacks are part of growth. So when they hit one, they find a way around it, like Josh Waitzkin did when he lost in chess or in martial arts.
As mentioned, I came to the career that I have in psychology really through the classroom. I mean, we've all been through the classroom, but I also went through the classroom as a teacher. And I just want to say quite simply, the insights that brought me to this program of research were very simple. A, kids are pretty smart. Yep, they are really good at learning things. And even the students who are not doing so well, I would just say in my classes, the students who were not doing so well, if you sit next to them and talk to them about things they do care about, like, pretty smart. So that was one just insight, like, oh, didn't know that you know, most, all the kids actually that I taught were fairly bright children, in my view. And then the second thing was, yeah, math. Lots of things that kids have to learn. Math, grammar, writing a nice paragraph. Hard, yeah, definitely hard, but not beyond their intellectual ken. I just felt that so much of, you know, culture and the messages that kids were encoding were like, oh, who's smart enough to learn this? I was thinking about, like, who's smart to learn, like, how to get X by itself on the left side of this equation? Like, pretty much all of you. And I began to think that it wasn't an intellectual capacity problem that was explaining primarily American underachievement and the underachievement of these particular kids who were sitting in the seats in front of me. So I wanted to understand the psychology of effort, and that brought me to psychology, not so that I could castigate children or point fingers or blame, but so I could truly understand, like, why do people work hard? What is it like to work hard? When do we work hard and when do we not work hard? So, you know, I'll tell you particularly about one aspect of psychology, one aspect among others that I think does bear on how much work kids are going to put forward to their academics or to anything else they care about. I stole this from the New York Times website, but, you know, I'm sure I have their blessing. And why is it on the website? I think it's because there is something resonant, maybe the word, it's very onomatopoeic, like grit, it sounds gritty, I guess. This is what I mean by grit, and I think there is a resonance here. I think when I talk to coaches and pastors and rabbis and teachers and parents and uncles and aunts and astronauts and other folks who really resonate with this idea that this construct is important, I think it's because there is this realization that many things in life require you to work at it for extended periods of time with interest and effort, and the goal in you know, whatever it is that you care about is so distant that it might take you months, years, and in some cases even longer. So this idea is just resonant, I think, across a lot of things. In particular, I have a soft spot for children, but I also think that it bears on probably everything that the people in the room here do. So here's a very simple diagram that leaves out all the social, political, poverty factors that I think must influence children's learning and their effort. I study grit because I'm a psychologist. I was hanging around with some sociologically trained sociologists today at lunch, and I realized that, you know, very obviously this is an incomplete picture of what's going on, but it's a start, and I do want to understand the psychology of the kid. Are the grittier students, you know, working harder? Are they accumulating more high quality time on task than others? And if so, in particular, why are they doing that? And my view is that, in particular, gritty people do two things. They show up, which Woody Allen told us long ago is 80% of success in life. Just be there. Just keep being there. And after they show up, they do this thing called daily deliberate practice. Now, I'm really interested in my work, and I'll say very little bit about this, but just, you know, David and I want to tease you into a conversation, which is the last half of our time together. I think that when children or grown-ups decide to, you know, do things that are hard over long stretches of time, They do things essentially based on the expected costs and benefits. That's right. I pretty much think kids are rational agents. I know that's very unpopular to think of people as rational these days, but I think at some level, deeply, people are fairly sane, including children who are driving you crazy at the moment. But in their heads, something must be going on that makes their behavior sensible to them. And now, of course, we have to understand what it is that's going on when it doesn't make sense to us. Now, what I mean by deliberate practice is nicely summarized by this graph, not from my own research, but from the work of Anders Ericsson. Pretty much everyone in the room has read or heard of Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and I will say that the work on deliberate practice, thousands and thousands of hours of this special kind of practice, is not Gladwell's own idea. But in fact, shocker, a scientist named Anders Ericsson who studies experts. And in his study of experts in as diverse fields as you can think of, from Sudoku to soccer, he finds that there's a skill curve, so skills on the vertical axis, and what he's graphed here is years of deliberate practice on the x-axis. You really only have a chance at world-class levels of performance, that's the dotted horizontal line, after you've accumulated thousands and thousands of hours over years and years of this kind of practice. There's nothing magic about the number 10,000 except for that it's round, and it was one average in one study, but I think the generalized insight is that getting really good at anything, I mean anything, being a chef or a mathematician, does take a tremendous amount of work over time. And in particular, when Anders studies experts, he finds that they practice in a very particular way, which he dubs deliberate practice. They do all four of these things at once. They're working on something very self-conscious and specific that they cannot yet do. So they have set out to do what they cannot do. They concentrate completely, true, full 100% concentration. They get immediate and informative feedback. So for example, Olympic downhill skiers have themselves videotaped, and as soon as they can, they get their hands on the videotape and they watch it so they can then learn on what to do a little differently the next time. And then finally, they practice to fluency. My husband's a former violist, like as in he played viola in college, and then he went back to take viola lessons, and he came home one day and he said, his viola teacher said that he had to play this single piece that he had been assigned, right? 10 times flawlessly before he would be given the next viola piece. And I thought to myself, oh, right, that's how experts practice. Not to like B+, not to kind of get it, but truly to complete fluency and automaticity. And what does it feel like to do deliberate practice? I love this essay that Martha Graham wrote towards the end of her career for National Public Radio. She says, it takes about 10 years to make a mature dancer, right? So again, nothing magic about 10 years or 10,000 hours, but it does come up again and again, it's true. She says, dancing appears glamorous, easy, and delightful, but the path to the paradise of achievement is not easier than any other. There is fatigue so great that the body cries even in its sleep. There are times of complete frustration. There are daily small deaths. This is what it feels like to do deliberate practice, at least according to one very great artist. It's not always that bad, but when we went to the National Spelling Bee, we wanted to know what kids were doing and how it felt. So we had them keep diaries of the kinds of things that they did, and they listed all sorts of things, and they kept track of not only how it felt in terms of its effort and its enjoyment, but also how many hours and minutes they were doing. And here's our data. So there's 3 bars in each cluster. The dark bars are doing deliberate practice. Things like writing the same word over and over again, lay down a page. In the middle, on the light bars, is being quizzed, like your mom might say Usprache, and you say U-S-P-R-A-C-H-E, Usprache, which was the winning word that year, and which I just learned how to spell, by the way. And then what they really want to do all day is what we coded as leisure verbal activities, mostly reading, right? Which kids actually in the study rated as enjoyable as eating ice cream. So super enjoyable things in some cases, high effort things in it, but in the picture that we're painting here is not that unlike Martha Graham's description of low enjoyment, high effort for deliberate practice. But when you throw everything into the same model and you ask, in terms of time, which kind of practice uniquely predicts spelling bee performance in the finals, it's only deliberate practice. And grit was the best psychological predictor of how much time kids spent. What we're painting here is not that unlike Martha Graham's description of low enjoyment, high effort for deliberate practice. But when you throw everything into the same model and you ask, in terms of time, which kind of practice uniquely predicts spelling bee performance in the finals, it's only deliberate practice. And grit was the best psychological predictor of how much time kids spent. Now, some of us may have children in the room or grandchildren or nieces, nephews. I just want to point out one thing. Being quizzed is actually a very good thing for studying, in part because you can identify what you don't know, but then of course you have to go and practice it. And that might be why in this model it falls out as not being super predictive. So do quiz your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, but also recognize that there's a certain amount of practice that they have to do with full concentration, working on something they can't, with feedback, repetitively, in order for them to improve. Now, I want to transition to this expected value idea, this idea that kids are, in a way, little economists trying to figure out how they should optimize their benefits and minimize their costs. We created an intervention which simply taught kids what I just explained to you. We told them, Martha Graham hates to practice, says it kind of feels like dying, completely frustrated sometimes, totally confused. We spice it up, with cartoons, which are more fun to look at than me. We also tell them that if you look at scientific studies of kids and adults learning, the signature emotion of learning is not flow. It is not necessarily even curiosity or happiness or pride. The signature emotion of learning seems to be confusion. It is confusion which you have to sustain in this concentrated way that you don't enjoy, because confusion is a negative emotion, and that we should maybe reinterpret the experience of studying and homework as something which is normal and also potentially even a good sign, like I'm in my discomfort zone. Kids at the end, this is very Dweckian, I would say, have this exercise at the end where they write a letter to another student where they simply summarize what they've learned and actually tell a story from their own life that brings it to life. So for example, on the far right, dear student, deep practice helps me a lot with soccer. It makes me a better player. I used to be the one that was behind on my team, but now that I use deep practice, I'm one of the top players. It makes me frustrated, but I push through it with hard work, and that equals success, right? So we created a task that forced kids to do deliberate practice. We took Khan Academy material, but we increased the algorithm so that